Hey, welcome to today's episode. I'm your host, Chase Chewning, and today I'm going to be sitting down again with the homie, the friend, Mr. Robb Wolf, 2 times best-selling author, biochemist, and all-around badass. He knows his stuff when it comes to training, performing, and recovering well as nutrition. And in this episode, you're going to hear us talk about a few things, but primarily the importance of electrolytes. And that is where today's sponsor and Robb's new company, Elemental Labs, comes in. This is their Element Recharge Electrolyte Drink Mix, one of my favorite new flavors, mango chili. We actually talk about how it makes a great little margarita addition. So if you're looking for an easy, quick, grab and go way to refuel, to recover, to rehydrate for everyday wellness, or for getting over a hard workout when you're traveling, then I cannot recommend Element Labs enough. And in fact, exclusively for you, the Everforward Radio listener, during this month of January 2021, they're hooking it up for only $5. Just to cover the shipping, you're gonna get a free variety starter pack. You're gonna get 2 flavors of each of some of my favorite, and low commitment. And if you don't like it for whatever reason, 100% money back guarantee. So all you need to do to claim this exclusive offer during the month of January is head to drinkelement.com/everforward. That's drinklmnt.com/everforward. For only $5, you're going to get that variety pack. But I would recommend to go ahead and throw down and get yourself some of the big boxes. All right. Mango chili is one of my favorites. Also orange. So good. All right. Welcome to the show.
Hey folks, welcome to EverForward Radio. I am Robb Wolf. I am a 2 times New York Times bestselling author, co-founder of the 1st and 4th CrossFit affiliate gyms. But you don't want to hear about any of that. You want to hear about how to move your life ever forward. We got to talk about a ton of different things today: metabolic flexibility, the need for appropriate electrolyte supplementation. So look forward to connecting with you here on EverForward.
3, 2, 1.
Robb Wolf back on the airwaves. Welcome back to Everforward Radio, man. How you doing?
Always happy to bring down property values anywhere I go. So huge honor to be here again.
Man, it's been a hot minute since we were together in real life back in September, I think.
Yeah.
Lake Tahoe last year, the Spartan World events. I thoroughly enjoyed that conversation, man. You've been someone that, kind of like pioneering in the podcast space, someone that I've been listening to for so long and reading, and then to be able to connect, especially at an experience like that. How was that for you, man? How was that Tahoe event for you?
That was a blast. Like it was really fun, and it was kind of nice to not be part of the entity, like putting it on. Like I could actually kind of have a little bit of free time to just hang out with people and everything. Like, I always love doing like some of the paleo nerd fests and the low carb conventions and stuff like that. But there's a lot of expectations about what to do and where I need to go and everything. And the Spartan deal was cool because we got to do a bunch of podcasts and hung out and had some cocktails with people, ate some good food. So it was really fun because I could actually like relax and just kind of hang out with folks too. So that was awesome. I am really looking forward to doing something like that again at some point. So,
Let's put it out there into the universe for sure.
Yeah.
If not, I think I'm going to freak out and just like make my own. So you're invited.
Right.
There, man.
Right.
And you kind of touched on something there that I definitely wanted to highlight having you back on now. I'll make sure to link that episode for everybody down the show notes. We dove deep into a lot of nutritional protocols, and especially how your nutrition can really be affecting your sleep. Mm-hmm. And sometimes people don't always, connect those dots. There is a very strong correlation. But you touched on, a variety of different diets, or, I'll even say dogmas to some people in terms of what they do, what they don't do, what they eat, what they don't eat. That's what I really admire that about you, and like the work and the content you put out, and even how you guys coach and train people, is that like you may abide by some particular protocol when it comes to your training and your nutrition, but you're not like cutting off the borders. You're not turning people away. You're not just staying only invested in that. How do you do that? Because I think that's where a lot of people get lost when they find a nutritional protocol or a diet that works for them. Nothing else exists,
Well, we're looking at me 22 years down range tinkering with this stuff. Like I first started messing with low carb and kind of ketogenic ancestral type diets in 1998. had a lot of success with them. We co-founded the first and fourth CrossFit affiliate gyms early in this whole story. Yeah. So we had a lot of early selection bias where people would migrate to us who were a good fit. And it was interesting. One day I was having a conversation with somebody who had not been in the gym for a while. And she was like, you're such a nice person and you're so passionate and everything that I just couldn't tell you that what you were recommending to me wasn't working. I was like, well, what do you mean? And, it's like this low carb thing, like, I was just really flat at workouts, and I reintroduced some carbs and so it's funny. I had developed a myopic track that was successful, but was also leaving a bunch of collateral damage along the way. And that one gal, and I generally haven't tried to be a huge prick. Like I can have my moments, but I can have my moments, but generally I try to remain open-minded. But I had found this thing that worked really well for me, and I found a cross section of people for whom it also worked well. And then I had the hubris to assume that it worked that well for everybody, and it doesn't. And I broke a good number of people. I underserved them as a coach and whatnot. And there was a learning process of figuring out, okay, well, if just kind of a low carb ketogenic approach doesn't work for everybody, then where are the boundaries on that? How do I start triaging people? What are the signs and symptoms of success versus failure, which should be obvious, but when you're blinded by dogma, then it's not entirely obvious. And so I had to do some tinkering with that. And that actually ended up, I think, leading a lot into my second book, Wired to Eat, which was looking at, can we do a quantifiable way of looking at, say, how your blood glucose response looks to a given amount of carbohydrate and type of carbohydrate?
That's actually a new thing for me. I just started using levels as glucose monitor.
Yeah. And so like the CGM does in a very elegant way, what we were trying to do with this 7-day carb test within Wired to Eat, which is, and that was all based off of research that came out of the Weizmann Institute in Israel, where they looked at about 1,000 people, but 800 people very specifically, where they looked at their gut microbiome, their genetics, lipidology, like a very thorough analysis on these folks. And then they started feeding them different types of meals, specifically different types of carbohydrates. And the blood glucose response to these things didn't look at all like what we would normally expect, like the glycemic index to look. Yeah. It's like, okay, a banana is a high glycemic index food.
We're expecting peaks and spikes, but for some people we're not, kind of thing.
And some people you didn't see that. Yeah. And some people ate a chocolate chip cookie and they looked like they drank water. There was no blood glucose response, but then they would eat an apple or a banana and they had a crazy blood glucose response. And this was a kind of a watershed study that provided some solid basis for things that I had seen clinically, which was just basically like, man, not everybody responds the same damn way to the same food,
right?
And under the same circumstances.
Wild concept, something that not many of us have been taught.
But within this evidence-based nutrition scene, that's kind of like woo-woo. It's like, well, that's all anecdote and everything. And it's like, well, dropping a hammer on your foot is anecdotal, and it's going to have very replicatable, characteristics, even though it's an N equals 1, and so that was kind of cool. And so, I mean, it's definitely been a process to get to a spot where if somebody wants to work with me or they join our community and they're like, okay, I'm hamstrung in the following ways. And it's like, okay, well, describe who you are, what you want to do, and let's understand where you are currently with your life, with your fitness, with sleep, extenuating circumstances like kids and family and work. And, let's get a good picture of that.
Stress,
all of that. Now, where do you want to go? What do you want to do? And so if we understand where the person is and then where they want to go, we can build a reasonable idea about how to get there. And then I would still say that some sort of like carbohydrate restriction usually benefits maybe like 80-85% of people across the board.
In what regard would you say, for like the everyday person, or even
the everyday person and even athletes? I would say that And this gets interesting. Like we might have an MMA person who was running on 600 grams of carbohydrate previously, and we get them down around 200 grams of carbohydrate, which is still high carb compared to like keto orthodoxy, but is a fairly low carb compared to where they were
For them, yeah.
for them. And they find that they have better body composition, better appetite control. They don't get the blood sugar swings that they used to get. But what we can do then is kind of A/B test this stuff. We can have a plan, start implementing it, see how people do. And if it's smooth sailing and they're succeeding, okay, great. If we start running into some problems or like, man, I'm just really flat, I'm lethargic. Okay, let's look at your electrolytes or let's start, tinkering with maybe pre or post workout carbohydrates or increasing carbohydrates across the board. And so in that way, it becomes hopefully non-dogmatic. Like you need somewhere to start.
Right.
And so, like some of the folks like if it fits your macros folks, then they're kind of like, okay, we'll start with protein. We'll just figure out your calories from there and you can break it up between fat and carbs. And we don't really care about the qualitative nature and go. And if that works for folks, great. But you need somewhere to start, particularly with folks that just have no background in any of this stuff. My girls are learning to play piano, and when you first sit down, it's kind of like, okay, these keys are set up in the following way, and they're this repeating set of 8, and you have to have some starting place.
Yeah, you got to have a baseline, and you got to be introduced to a system, and then you actually have to like honor and respect that system to get a fair evaluation of, is this working or is this not?
Very well said. Yeah. So thank you. And that was a very long-winded way of saying, like, it's been a process to get to a spot where I feel like we can be pretty nimble in the way that we work with folks. And I still would say that the bulk of my focus is more in that like autoimmune gut problem, metabolic, kind of derangement type things. Working with athletes is super cool, but it's not really where my passion is. Like I kind of feel like if I can help somebody overcome an autoimmune condition or deal with a really serious gut issue like ulcerative colitis or something, like I know that has really affected that individual's life. And so I tend to put the bulk of my focus in those areas. Yeah.
Oh yeah. I mean, with those things you're talking about, if you can just help them yield, even a 1%, maybe 5%, change for the better. I mean, talk about a massive increase in their quality of life for sure.
Right.
It's amazing. And all the things you're talking about, is this kind of what you referred to in your work as metabolic flexibility?
So metabolic flexibility is a term that's been out in the I guess, metabolism space for quite some time. And it just speaks to the ability to shift back and forth between different fuel substrates, mainly fat and carbohydrate, in a relatively effortless way. And it's interesting. Maybe about 5 years ago, I started getting really, really geeked out on this idea of metabolic flexibility. I did a couple of talks around it. And the idea of metabolic flexibility, I think, answers a lot of the seeming contradictions that we observe when you look at like low carb diets versus low fat diets and whatnot. And I thought that it was going to be like the holy grail around all the stuff that I was doing. I had outlined like a metabolic flexibility practitioner certification that I was going to roll out. Like I was really, really fired up about it. And then the further I got into it, I was like, it's great to have metabolic flexibility. And there are things that we can do to garner metabolic flexibility, lift weights, do a little bit of intermittent fasting, stuff like that. But then beyond that, what people usually sell metabolic flexibility is this situation where you can kind of gorge on both fat and carbs. And the reality is that by doing that, you break metabolic flexibility.
Yeah, you're confusing the system, really.
Yes. Yeah. And so I realized that I was kind of like, you can goose your metabolic flexibility. Like you could take somebody who's primarily a carb burner and make them more fat adapted. And there's some benefits to that. And you could have somebody that's been keto or low carb for too long, and they've maybe lost some of the ability to access like that lactate driven, like lower gear. So there's some things that you can do there, but it's not a massive change that you can affect with diet, lifestyle training. I mean, there kind of is, kind of isn't, but the reality is that where you are on that spectrum, in my opinion, so this is kind of definitely an opinion piece, but wherever you are in that metabolic flexibility spectrum, like my wife is super metabolically flexible. She can handle carbs. She could shift to keto. She has no keto flu with the transition. Like she doesn't even notice one way or the other. She's
Those
super
are the people that we
flexible.
hate secretly. Yes, of course.
Yes.
Which, to
Yes.
be honest, I think I might be a little bit of that as well. I mean, I've over the years personally, and especially when I was in my like clinical practicing days, I would go through all these protocols. I would hard commit to intermittent fasting, hard commit to keto, hard commit to all of these things. Minimum really like 30 to 90 days, like bare minimum, really, just so that I could understand and better advise. And I really kind of found like some personally I preferred, and some I preferred, especially around the type of training that I like to do, or even sometimes could do. I had that metabolic flexibility, and so then it just came down to preference. Like, oh, if I can kind of get similar results from certain protocols, well, which one am I actually going to stay adherent to? And I'll just run with that.
Right. Which is awesome. And I am not that person. Like, I've done everything, like fish oil and magnesium and donating blood to reduce my iron so that my oxidative status is less. And that should improve my insulin, sensitivity. And I still just kind of suck at metabolizing carbs. Like I have to really titrate them out. I can't do too many in a sitting. I can do a little bit pre and post workout, but I'm talking like 15 or 20 grams of carbs here, like an apple, a small apple, or something like that. I'm not, otherwise I just feel like shit. Like I just get foggy headed and I don't have good cognition. And
low carb day for me is about 200 grams, to be honest.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
A little bit these days, the past several months, just because my training frequency and intensity has definitely taken a dip in 2020. But even still, I'm conscious of my total. I no longer track or anything, but just in my head, I kind of keep portion size and quality, of course. But even still, like I can tell when I'm in that brain fog, and I can always feel it for me personally. I wonder if anybody can relate. I always feel it in my eyes first. Yep. I feel like sunken in. I can tell that my eyes have like bags or dark circles, that they just feel heavy, and I'm like, oh, when's the last time I had, some oats or some rice or, anything like that, and just another serving and boom, I'm back.
Oh, interesting. Yeah. Interesting. Yeah. So, I mean, it's stuff like that. And where I was so excited about metabolic flexibility, and it's such a sexy topic. And after this podcast, somebody is going to crack all this shit open. But here's the deal: is that what I figured out is that I was going to need to lie constantly to people about the potentiality of improving their situation. That there was some real quantifiable milestone that they could change. And everybody can improve their metabolic flexibility. Everybody can typically improve their health situation, but the way that the term was being used, it offered this change that I just didn't see as really being obtainable. And so I was going to need to create this whole complex like mythology around this stuff to be able to perpetuate this thing. And I mean, I had a fair amount of time and effort invested into this thing. And then just from an ethical perspective, and also I just lost interest in it. I was like, man, if this thing isn't like really cool and really distinguishing technology or feature that I could bring to bear in working with people, then I'm just not that excited about doing it, And
this is a huge recognition. I can't use my word.
Revelation.
Huge revelation. Absolutely. I mean, because these are, especially, talking to like the fitness professionals and coaches out there, like when you have that experience, and I definitely have, it causes friction. It causes you to not show up the same way for your clients, but it's not necessarily, I will say, a bad thing, but it is something that you need to be aware of, because this may be whether it's just how your body is responding, but certainly where your personal interests align, you need to kind of like pay attention to that, figure it out, and or move along and, serve you, but also serve the right group of people at the same time,
Right. Yeah. And it's always interesting because, there's more competition in this space than ever, with like Facebook and more Instagram, I guess, but social media in general. there's this crazy incentive process for doing over the top shit and for, you know, the newest, coolest way, you know, I remember, I'm probably old enough. There are a lot of people that won't be, where, there was an ad that was incredibly successful, and it was early Facebook. And it's like, with this one weird trick was kind of the tagline. And
Sure, yeah.
yeah, and one of my friends, actually, his handle online is one weird trick, because it just tickled him so much. He's actually a doctor, funny enough, but you really, one can easily be coerced or brought into this process where you want to distinguish yourself. It's like, you know, well, there's a bunch of different people out there in this space. You know, it's why would I pick this person versus that person? So if you can spin up this thing that you've got some sort of secret sauce, and it's really unique and it's kind of proprietary, and you're the smartest person in the room and nobody else has thought about it, then you know, it could be a really powerful thing. And so it was hard to let that one down, because I noodled. I'm like, is there any way to spin this and still remain credible? So like, if I was getting cross-examined from a smart person, that like, I'm not talking out of both sides of my face. And I was like, no, like it will not be like epistemologically consistent. And I just don't want to be in that embarrassing spot where I need to like lie or cover something up, you know. But I rubbed and massaged this thing, trying to figure, is there anything here, you know? And metabolic flexibility is important. Like it's a laudable thing, and there are things that we can do to affect it. Improve our sleep, do some metabolic conditioning, you know, like interval training, do some long, slow stuff, lift some weights, get sun on your skin, have some hot and cold exposure here and there. All those things are great, but there's also, in my opinion, again, kind of a genetic or epigenetic constraint on how great you can modify that. I am never going to be as metabolically flexible as my wife. And the only way that I could break my wife metabolically is to feed her a really terrible diet for a protracted period of time, not have her train. And then we could get her into a spot where her metabolism is kind of broken. But then, because she's Italian and just tougher than I am, she would probably bounce back and not be that poorly off, you know, if we did the right things. Whereas I just found very little wiggle room with folks. You know, and usually it was kind of like, okay, you just do better with a few more carbs. Like it's kind of like that, you know, 150, 200 grams of carbs for you seems to be a good spot. And for a lot of people in kind of low carb land, like it would just knock them out. Like they would be in these perpetual hypoglycemic events because they're just not managing that glycemic load well. And again, I've tried so many things with so many people, and it just didn't move the needle that often, you know, like donating blood and stuff like that. Yeah.
Well, there's one area I want to shift into that I think, regardless of your nutritional approach or protocol, kind of has some carryover. And that's recovery, that's rehydration, and that's even, you know, in some way, shape, or form, being in a fasted state, training in a fasted state, or for you're intermittent fasting. You don't realize that maybe you're traveling, you're going through a long period of time, and you're not replenishing nutrients, calories, electrolytes, things like that. I know it's been a big shift in focus for you personally and professionally with everything you're doing at Elemental Labs. What is it about this state of being, regardless of our training or our diet, that you have found is so necessary to focus on in terms of recovery, rehydration, and just why maybe so many people have been missing the mark on electrolytes and things like magnesium and potassium, and really what they do for the body?
It's a really good question. And I don't want this to sound trite, but when you look at just the way that life functions, the main currency that is used is some type of electrolyte management. When we are thinking, when we move, you know, like neurons firing, muscles firing, it's a process of generating ATP as an energy substrate, and that is all driven by sodium potassium pumps in the body. Like it is literally like the currency of life. Trying to think, like, if somebody is in an emergency medical scenario, like they end up in an emergency room, some of the first things that they look at with folks, it's kind of like, okay, pulse rate and ventilation. They look at their oxygen saturation. Then they look at pH, which kind of factors into a bunch of this stuff because our pH modifies the way the enzymes work, like whether oxygen gets delivered or doesn't get delivered. And we survive within a very narrow pH band. And then the other thing that is arguably maybe as important or maybe just slightly second tier is electrolyte status. And what will happen frequently is people will end up in some sort of a life-threatening scenario that is due to an electrolyte imbalance. And usually, not always, but usually, too much potassium in the extracellular fluid, not enough sodium relative to that, and that starts causing a whole host of problems.
Look at the extremities, like Addison's disease.
Yes, yeah.
That's literally when what you just described gets to that extreme level, and that will cause organ system failure.
Yes, yeah. So it's one of these things that is just so important that I think it almost becomes like water for fish. It's just there, and so you almost don't even recognize it. And then there's a couple of other kind of interesting things along the way within our kind of interesting dietary guideline development. Sodium got really associated negatively with various poor health outcomes, specifically hypertension, high blood pressure. And there is an interesting relationship there. Sodium does play a role in hypertension, but what's counterintuitive is that low sodium diets don't fix hypertension. It's because the sodium isn't the cause. The cause is chronically elevated insulin levels that cause us to elevate the production of a hormone called aldosterone, which causes us to retain sodium.
So in that sodium potassium pump to actually function.
Yes. Yeah. And it's interesting, like a bear getting ready for hibernation is dyslipidemic and is hypertensive because it's retaining sodium and water and all this stuff.
That makes total sense. Yeah.
Yeah. And so to some degree, it's a little bit of like a hibernation preparation response, even though most mammals don't hibernate, but they have some characteristics of what we would see with animals that hibernate. At the end of a seasonal cycle, they tend to be fatter and they tend to be a little dyslipidemic and hypertensive, high blood pressure and all that type of stuff. But then we tend to have a period of fasting and relative, starvation or what have you, and it kind of undoes all that stuff. But that's kind of what's interesting is it's been understood for a long time that if you have someone fast, they will lose water and specifically lose sodium. It's called the natriuresis of fasting, the loss of sodium due to fasting. And this is what happens under ketogenic and low carb diets. And honestly, this happens, it's not an on or off deal. Like if you were eating a standard American diet that has X amount of carbs and you just shifted to a more whole food based diet that was more like kind of paleo, like more fruits and roots, for the same amount of carbs, it's going to have a different insulin impact. And so you're going to retain less sodium in that story. Wow. And people will feel terrible in the transition around that. And this is, it's kind of a long story how I personally had this all kind of, awakened to this, but realized that electrolytes were just this huge deal. And another kind of interesting thing in this whole story. So sodium really got demonized inappropriately within our whole dietary story. And most processed foods are high in sodium, but that doesn't necessarily mean that a non-processed diet would be bad if you include sodium in it.
We need to be looking at causation versus correlation.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. And so that's a piece of the whole thing. And then somewhere along the line, when you look in a textbook of medical physiology and you look up the term hydration, it is the water and the electrolytes, which are sodium, potassium, magnesium, calcium, and the anions with it, like chloride and bicarbonate and different things that go with that. So both the positive and the negative ions in that story. But somewhere along the line, hydration just became water. And this is actually like 1950s, 60s era football practices and military, they would just have people take salt tablets, and then they would sip on water to their hydration level. And people going down due to hyperhydration, where they dilute their electrolytes to such a degree that they could get sick or even potentially die. That never happened until we started telling folks, hey, drink 8 to 10 8-ounce glasses of water a day, and all these dangers around dehydration. So we kind of demonized sodium on the one hand because of some dietary considerations. We lost contact with the reality that hydration means electrolytes and water. Like it can't mean anything else.
Take a
because
poll now. Most people won't include that, I think.
No.
Common person on the street will just be like, oh yeah, drink water. No,
Right.
It's not the water and. Yeah.
And the irony is that an individual, you could make a case that if a person only had access to water, and again, this will kind of depend from situation to situation, but you could make
it with
the
a grain of
case,
salt, people, like pun intended.
exactly. Yes. Yeah. But you could make the case that if you were facing over consuming water absent electrolytes, you might be better off not consuming water or being very careful in the water that you consume, because it is really hard to get someone to die from dehydration, from inadequate fluid volume. It can happen. Usually it's related to illness and like diarrhea and different things like that. But there have been almost no documented circumstances, and I did a lot of research on this. If somebody has access to fluids, it is just about impossible to get folks to die from under consuming fluids. But there are mountains of examples of people over consuming water or fluids and dying or getting very sick from overly diluting their electrolyte pool. So, it's all this stuff kind of coming together, and within lower carb communities, the need for electrolytes are definitely elevated. It's not constrained only to that. Larger individuals need more electrolytes, people training in a hot or humid environment. And I didn't even know this, but high altitude and cold actually increases your fluid and electrolyte needs in some ways more so than heat and humidity does.
Really?
And it's because when you are cold and when you're at high altitude and it's cold, the air is very, very dry. So like your lungs and mucous membranes have to work overtime to be able to keep things moist. And so you lose a lot that way. And when you're cold, your thirst is powerfully downregulated. And so the potential for getting into a really nasty dehydrated scenario
Not to be triggered as much to drink water.
Yeah. And you just don't associate that as being a dangerous situation in a cold environment versus a hot environment. But then in that cold environment, you are not thirsty. And so your fluid volume decreases. And when the fluid volume decreases, you're less able to move heat around your body. The way that heat travels around your body is through your circulation.
Yeah.
So it's literally a heat pump that's moving heat all throughout your body. So you're at increased risk for frostbite and a bunch of other problems. So managing hydration under really cold and higher altitude environments is actually very, very challenging. When people are in a warm environment, there's almost this. It doesn't downregulate thirst the way that it does in a cold environment. So that's one major feature of that. But yeah, we've been doing a deep dive on this stuff with Element for the past couple of years, and it's been fascinating seeing the breadth and depth of people that have been benefiting from getting in and properly addressing their electrolyte status. Like, it's been really interesting, like everything from like breastfeeding moms that were really struggling with, breast milk production. And then they started they tried Element and they just got on point with their electrolytes, and their breast milk production just dramatically increased. And we actually have a study via Vanderbilt School of Epidemiology that's going to look specifically at that. And then another interesting community that we were not expecting at all is the POTS community, the postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome community, which mainly affects kids, but it can affect adults. But it's a scenario where the person goes from seated to standing, and they get very lightheaded and can pass out. And it's a dangerous situation because people can get head injuries and potentially die from this whole process. It's well understood that sodium is a major factor in this story. So like the doctors and the folks in those communities are on board with the notion that they need more sodium, but they just haven't had great options around that. And so we've just had amazing adoption from folks around there. And I guess that's probably one of our most interesting challenges in general, is kind of convincing people that sodium isn't necessarily the boogeyman that they maybe have associated it. But what's cool about that is if we can get people to just try getting more on point with their sodium, potassium, magnesium status and really focus on sodium, everything else works out well. But if we don't address sodium properly, so many people tend to focus on potassium, and we definitely need potassium. But if you get too much potassium, that absolutely becomes a problem. Like you will die from that quicker than you will from over consuming sodium. So there's a much more forgiving window on the overconsumption of sodium than there is on the underconsumption of sodium and overconsumption of potassium. Yeah,
you hit on one of the key other elements. I guess pun intended at this point. In looking at electrolytes and rehydration, and something that I know that you all highlight in recharge is magnesium. And magnesium is something that is one of those things that once it got on my radar, I always heard it associated with, you can use it for, recovery, like achy muscles. You can use it for, helping get into a rested and relaxed state for sleep. And certain supplements that I take that are meant for sleep, there's more of an emphasis on magnesium. But I came to realize, I had Sean Stevenson on the show not that long ago, and we're kind of diving into a lot of things in his new book, Eat Smarter. And he dropped this stat on me that just blew my mind. There's something like 650 bodily processes that we know of that are dependent on magnesium in order to function at all or to function properly. And majority of Americans, due to the standard American diet, are very much lacking in magnesium and deficient. So just think about that for a second, everyone listening. Like, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of things that your body does that it needs to do just to function, that you're aware of, and back of the system kind of stuff. Imagine if those are running low and you don't even realize it, and if you could bring up magnesium, not only to contribute to maybe a better training state or rehydration, but just imagine what could be. Imagine the potential, hundreds of systems getting more of the juice that they need. What's been your kind of like biggest takeaway with magnesium? Why is it in element, not only just from an electrolyte perspective, but just, what's your kind of stance on it, and what's it here to do for us?
Yeah, I mean, the modern highly refined diet definitely is deficient in magnesium. An interesting piece to that story, though, again, is that if you don't have adequate sodium, it's very difficult to hang on to the magnesium. So this is another piece that's kind of missed in that. If you get adequate sodium, it will encourage the body to kind of hang on to the magnesium that it is getting. But that said, if we are eating not generally whole unprocessed foods, then just there's not typically enough magnesium available. It's funny. It's again almost one of those like water for fish stories. Magnesium is involved in so many different things that you almost kind of get like fatigue from listing it, but just energy production. So the enzyme, one of the enzymes involved in ATP production, one of its key elements to it is magnesium, and it plays such a huge factor in so many other processes, like certain neurotransmitter production and whatnot. It's a cofactor in many different enzymes. And so if you think about all these different important metabolic processes, and if they are limited in some way due to inadequate magnesium being available, then it's not hard to imagine all of these terrible knock-on effects. And a good friend of mine, Dr. Kirk Parsley, He's a retired Navy SEAL, went on to become a physician, and he ran the Navy SEALs kind of dive medicine on the West Coast for just about a decade.
Wow.
But he's made this a lot of interesting, but he's basically a sleep expert now. Like, and it's an interesting process. He'd be a great guest for the show at some point.
Sleep is I'm making a note right now. That's yeah.
He didn't start off as wanting to be a sleep expert, but because of all the demands that the SEALs face, he noticed that so many of the problems that they developed were largely sleep related and diet.
I was in the Army. I can imagine if I had a sleep specialist, that would have helped so much. I mean, you get sleep deprivation just in military service, but special forces, Navy SEALs like that. I mean, you're running on a couple hours sometimes, every few days.
Well, and you have that, and then you have the constant low-grade traumatic brain injuries, like a parachute deployment is a mild traumatic brain injury. Going over a Zodiac on the water, the boats, it's a mild traumatic brain injury. Firing anything like a 7.62 or larger is a traumatic brain injury, every single time, just that concussion wave.
That's fun, though.
It's super fun.
That was the fun part of the job.
But then when you think about the really pro-inflammatory diet, the poor sleep, and all the rest of it, then it's not surprising that folks emerge out of those communities with just all of these different problems. But on the sleep side, he made the following, a couple of interesting cases. One is that evolution has had several billion years to fiddle with things, and it hasn't figured out how to make sleep go away. So if you think you're smarter than all of biology, like the best that it's done is like a shark will turn half of its brain off and it will sleep half a brain at a time. Like that's
right.
That's as good as it gets. And apparently like some horses and stuff like that do kind of a similar thing sometimes, but then they lay down and sleep. But biology has not figured out how to make sleep go away. And so it's really powerful. And you're also really exposed to risk and danger. And so there's a huge trade-off there, and so that's a big thing. And he made the point that for children on up to about 20, 25-year-olds, they are literally better the day after day because their hormones and their sleep are set up in such a way that whatever damage or trauma they experience today gets not just healed, but improved upon tonight and tomorrow, which is why you just keep kicking more and more ass at, your teens, your early 20s. And then you hit this point where you're just kind of hanging on. And then the main feature of what changes, 30s, 40s, 50s is declining quality of sleep. And it's kind of like a bank account where each day you are recovering, but you're not recovering 100%. You're 99.9% and then 99.8 and then 98%. And so anything that you can do, finding a glycemic load that allows you to sleep your best, that's awesome. Getting a magnesium level that facilitates good sleep and a vitamin D level, and just like getting outside and getting circadian entrainment so that when you do sleep, it's really improved. Arguably, that sleep, you could make it an argument that everything that we do, if it is beneficial for us, it is mainly because it improves the quality and the duration of our sleep in a way that we recover better. And it's exercise is good, but it's good in many regards because it tends to foster better sleep and the adaptation that occurs with it and all that stuff. Yeah.
So well said. You have a few more minutes? I want to get into one other area before we kind of wrap up.
Yeah.
This has been amazing. I always enjoy talking with you, man. It reminds me of, I need to start getting back on my research game a little bit more, because you get to a point and kind of like, oh, this is who I am, this is what I do, that we forget to kind of keep the re-education, especially 2020.
Charles Poliquin is the person I really learned that from, where he carved out. Unfortunately, Charles died, I think like 2 years ago now, but he had 2 days a week for 3-hour blocks that he did nothing but read research articles. And that was it. There was no email, there was no nothing. His phone was turned off. And it may have even been a longer period of time than that. And I like everybody, I'm definitely busy, but I definitely carve out a chunk of time to just read research And, I really try also to dig into topics like economics and physics and things that don't seem nutrition related, because it will spawn ideas that then I'm like, oh, I wonder if there's some tie in here. So I really try to get out into other disciplines
Yeah.
to be able to inform better what I'm up to here. Yeah. Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Have you ever checked out the book or the podcast or the content Freakonomics?
Yes. Yeah. Perfect example.
I mean,
Yeah.
what is it? Their
Yeah.
tagline is like, it's like the surprising secret of like the connection of everything. I'm probably butchering it, but
Yeah.
that was one area. That book is amazing. I know they've had like a revamp and their podcast is incredible, but it's just, they look at like the economics and the connection of everything and how it actually spills over into, you'd be surprised like how, I don't know, the pharmaceutical industry or like, busting the cartels down in South America actually influences the quality of your produce.
Right.
It's
right.
wild. It's wild. Yeah. I'll have to make sure to link that in the show notes for people to check out. But I wanted to get to one other topic before we kind of wrap up here. We're kind of getting on the subject already. Once we start talking about, dialing in our nutrition and focusing on these vital electrolytes for rehydration and then sleep, because in sleep is where our bodies and our brains recover and repair and heal and regrow and cleanse and detox and all these things. Is this kind of what you talk about in your work of resilient aging, kind of bringing all these factors together so that we can age smarter, really?
Yeah. Yeah. I detest the term anti-aging because the only way you stop aging is if you die. And so until we have some
only anti-aging.
that is literally the only anti-aging until or unless we develop some like gene therapy that can go back in. And there are some really fascinating potentialities around this stuff from a technology perspective. Like as we age, the methylation of our DNA, the epigenetics definitely changes. And a fascinating thing happens, I believe, twice in embryological development where, it's always been interesting to me that we get half of our genes from our mom, half of our genes from our dad, they get mixed. I'm like, how does all that stuff start off anew? Because like we all accumulate damage and baggage and all that type of stuff. And, the epigenetic switch gets reset with an embryo, with that new cell. So it just gets all of the baggage for the most part kind of gets wiped clean. It's not entirely true, but you start off with kind of a fresh slate. You start off with a cell that has not divided before, like the telomeres are long and all that type of stuff. So there's all that type of jive. But then on this resilient aging side, even absent that, we have remarkable capacities to recover. But as you get, I'm going to be 49 this year, so I'm like a month
you
out
look great.
from that. Thank you. They keep dipping me in formaldehyde, and it just
sleeping in
works
Tupperware.
out well. Yeah, but I feel good. Like when I think back to my dad, and when he was 50, he seemed old. Like he seemed legitimately old. I wake up some mornings and I don't feel as good as I might want to. Like I have a really frisky day of jujitsu, and the next day I wake up and I'm like, wow, I feel my rib cage or whatever. And but by and large, I feel pretty good, and I'm fortunate that I've been doing this stuff for a long time. I eat well, able to spend lots of time with my family. We really prioritize sleep. I dread when my daughters end up with a social life that doesn't allow me to go to bed at like 8:30 or 9 o'clock. Like that's going to suck.
Daddy's got to go to sleep.
Yeah. But those, staying mobile, trying to lift some weights, maintain whatever muscle mass I can as I age, eat adequate protein. I think that's one of these things that, the protein phobia that exists both in say kind of like vegan land, but also keto folks, like these interesting crowds that are terrified of protein, mTOR, growth factors. They have this idea that like massive amounts of fasting and protein restriction are going to save them from cancer and neurodegenerative disease and what have you. And I'm just not sold on that. But I guarantee you they're not going to age particularly well, because that sarcopenic process, that process of losing muscle, once you get past your 30s, It's just got a very predictable trajectory to it. And, you know,
You got to fight not only to build it, but you got to fight to keep it.
Yes. And everything you can do to flatten that curve for sure. And, but you know, cancer, neurodegenerative disease, cardiovascular disease, all of those are possibilities for all of us. It is a guarantee, though, for all of us that we will lose muscle as we age. That is a take it to the bank deal. Yeah. And so I could see a little bit of intermittent fasting, a little bit of time restricted feeding, maybe a little bit of protein cycling, but I think people have gone crazy on this. And we're going to see some not great results of people avoiding protein and maybe doing a little bit too much fasting another like 5 years or so. We're going to see some kind of nasty consequences of that stuff. But yeah, I see this resilient aging story. It's just kind of more of the same, you know, remain mobile, lift some weights, have some metabolic engine so you can do the things that you want to do. Eat in a way that fosters all of that stuff. But then sleep is kind of the cornerstone of the whole thing. Like, you know, whatever by hook or by crook that one could do that fosters better sleep seems to provide like the most remarkable benefits of anything you could do.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Sleep has been something that the last couple of years, the more and more I pay attention, you know, biofeedback, I've found that it more or less, more often than not, traces back to poor or good sleep.
Yep.
And the more that I can honor that sleep, not only in just, you know, body composition, energy levels, training, but also just quality of life, vitality and energy to just like get through the day and to get my most important work done and to show up for myself and my relationships and my wife. And just, you know, I will build my schedule and plan, you know, vacations and stuff around, all right, my circadian rhythm. If I can wake up the normal time here, like which flight is going to be the best. I mean, it may sound a little crazy or like a little extra legwork, but I promise you just a few extra minutes of prioritizing that or just taking inventory of where you are now will yield you exponential results. And so
absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
Well, Robb, dude, it's been a pleasure having you back on here, man. I want to be
you.
respectful of your time. We're kind of getting to the top of the hour here. I'm going to have, of course, you know, our first interview from Tahoe last year, linked down in the show notes and all of your work here. And I've been really, really enjoying Recharge and everything you guys have been doing at Element Labs. I've got a whole new box here, care packages. You guys just keep me stacked.
Cool.
I love it. I'm excited to try the new, what is it? Mango chili.
Yeah, they're really good at it, oddly enough, just as like, you know, an electrolyte drink, but man, they make an amazing margarita base. Like I
saw that flavor and I was like,
rails. Yeah,
it's going to be a margarita for sure. Yeah.
And I will say that your post drinking days, whether you use Element or not, just get enough electrolytes in. Like if you're having some booze, because it improves your sleep and yeah.
It's amazing. It kind of feeds into, I love how you guys even, you know, kind of getting a little off topic here, but you even market it like that, you know, and like, look, let's be real. People, we can be aware of all these things to help our quality of life, our, you know, health and fitness, but we're also human beings. And if we're going to, you know, have fun, we're going to, you know, maybe have a couple of drinks or we're going to get off our protocols for a couple of days. Like that's okay. But there's a way to just go about it in a way that, you know, you're not just letting the bottom fall out. And something like this is just do it a better way.
Yeah, and I don't want to drive this off a cliff, but when we were running our gym in Chico, we had a ton of real estate agents as clients. Like there was just a lot of them there. Chico was a very hot real estate market and whatnot. Not surprisingly, all of them noticed that if they looked better, they sold more stuff. You know, I mean, go figure, an attractive person, you know, it's male or female or whatever, they tend to do better. They also tended to drink a fair amount, which was one of the problems of not being overweight, because they would go out and drink and stay up late and, you know, and eat bad food and everything. So we help these folks get better, more on point with their nutrition and their sleep and everything. And then they were like, I may not be able to continue training with you guys. I'm like, why? And they're like, I'm not making much money. I'm like, it seems like you guys are just selling houses hand over fist. And they're like, well, I'm not actually a very interesting person if I don't have a couple of drinks in me. And so I just find I'm not closing the deals. I'm like, oh God. Okay. So, avoid beer, avoid sugary drinks, do like, you know, diet drink mixes with your stuff and like dry wines. Okay. And so, we do it to your point, like there is this spot where real life intervenes. And it's like, am I really helping someone with their health if my recommendations tank their job? And then they're like, you know, they're doing a career reboot because they can't sell houses anymore in a market where like somebody without a pulse could sell a house, Yeah. Yeah.
It's funny. Well, I appreciate it. And I love being well. I love all these things to influence and increase my quality of life. But I do also love me a margarita.
Absolutely.
That's for damn sure. Yeah.
When you have a couple of kids, it is the glue that keeps the family together sometimes. Absolutely.
That is honesty, my man. I appreciate that. Well, again, Rob, we're going to have all of your information down for everybody to check out. But the last question I ask everybody, and this will be round 2 for you. All of these things we've been talking about, we're kind of taking inventory of our life and our training and our supplements and our relationship and our sleep. And if we can just fine tune a few things here and there, I believe this helps us live a life ever forward. It can be a 1% difference. It can be 100% difference. But the important thing is that we're taking inventory, we're aware, and we're finding the thing that works for us so that we can take that next step forward. What does that mean to you, Rob? How do you live a life ever forward?
Interestingly, of late, it has been really curtailing social media. We have the Healthy Rebellion, which is a community that we have some paleo, low carb nerd people that hang out in there, and they're really wonderful. And we actually capped the enrollment in it because so much of the problem that occurs, in my opinion, in social media, and there's a lot of research that kind of I think backs this up, but the anonymity of crowds, like the Dunbar number is, it suggests that humans can only keep track of about 150 people, and then you lose count of them. And it's interesting when the Mormons went across the West, they broke people into groups of about 140, like military groups tend to get bunched into about 150 as kind of the main organizational unit. And then it gets fractionated from there.
That's about the size of a company. Yeah. I'm going.
Yeah. And so it's interesting that I think as cool as the many opportunities are around social media and whatnot, like we would have probably never met that Spartan, there's interesting elements to it, but moving my life forward has involved pruning a lot out at this point, and it sometimes can feel like career suicide because it's like, well, if I'm not on Instagram every day and like spinning that wheel and getting more followers, and it's tough, but I've found that I'm far happier. I'm much more engaged as a husband and a dad. It honestly, as I've stepped away from that, like I post material there, but I have an assistant that posts it. I write up something. I don't interface with the comments at all. And so I'm still trying to provide value, still trying to be engaged with people to some degree, but really on my terms. And my life has felt like being on vacation for over a month from doing that. And so that has moved my life ever forward, is actually making a decision, a really conscious decision. And it may end up being disastrous. I may end up working in a lab again or something like that, or, doing something else. But so far it's been very, very good for me, just psychically, emotionally. My sleep is better as a consequence. Like I don't go to bed ruminating on, some terrible comment that somebody has said to me or me to them, Yeah.
Well said, man. Well said. Absolutely. Well, nothing but the best to you and your family.
Same to you.
Great having you back on. And, again, check out Healthy Rebellion Radio, Elements Labs, all this stuff will be down in the show notes for you guys. And seriously, Element has been something that's been a great addition to my daily living for the past several months. I take it anytime I'm traveling as well. And we didn't even get into that, but, we're talking about, the dry air, the cold, because membranes have to work extra hard. I mean, this is why, they say to drink so much water when you're flying. Well, I'll say, drink smarter, add something like this.
Right.
So I appreciate you, man. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And look forward to seeing you in real life again.
Soon, man.
Soon.